Hello, and welcome to the Learning from Practice podcast from the Center for Peacemaking Practice at George Mason University's School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. This podcast is created for the purpose of sharing stories of peacemaking practice and practitioners from around the world. I'm Jackie Greif, the Executive Director of the Center for Peacemaking Practice, and I thank you for listening.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to gather these up. I'm going to do something most magicians don't typically do, which is I'm going to let you touch the card.
That's the voice of Zach Warren.
So my name is Zach Warren, and I work with the Afghan Mobile Mini Circus for Children, or also known as the Afghan Educational Circus for Children.
At the moment, Zach is demonstrating a card trick for me. He's shuffled a deck of cards and is holding them out, one by one, face down, and asking me to place them in piles according to whether I believe them to be red cards or black cards. Red.
Mm-hmm.
Red. Black.
Mm-hmm.
Red.
Mm-hmm.
Red.
Mm-hmm.
Black.
Sure?
No.
We'll just test that one. See how you... Yep, good job.
Okay.
It's a black one.
After having gone through all the cards, Zach asks me to turn the piles over. Okay, so they're all correct. Every pile is proper.
All right, so that's the
so that just proves I'm very good at predicting.
You're very good.
Card colors.
Very, very good at predicting card colors. So, did you want to start the interview?
Awesome. Yeah. Having finished wowing me with his card tricks, Zach sat down to talk about his work with juggling, unicycling, and magic with the Afghan Mobile Mini Circus.
It's based in Kabul, Afghanistan, but we also have centers in Herat, Jalalabad, Mazar-i-Sharif, and Bamiyan, which is in central Afghanistan. I've been working with them since 2005. Yeah, it's about 8 years now then, give or take. And started with fundraising for them, and then I did administrative work. And but from the very beginning, I've always been a teacher of juggling. So they needed someone to teach juggling. I started teaching juggling, and then unicycling, and then magic class after that. So I've been involved in getting them going in their juggling and skills, and it's a great way of engaging Afghan youth because it builds their self-confidence, and it's easy to everyone can juggle, everyone can jump right in. You don't have to have a certain qualification or a language or ethnicity, or you can be of any stripe, shape, color. You don't even need to speak English.
So how did you first get involved with them?
So they needed someone to teach juggling in 2005. They didn't have juggling. They had acrobatics. They had classes in musical instruments. They had theater class, but no juggling. So I was a circus performer before, and I was in divinity school at the time, and I passed off a trip to Afghanistan with the excuse of doing alternative field work for research, of course, and I've been using that excuse ever since.
So they were like, we should really get someone in here who can juggle. This guy looks good.
Right. Well, they heard about me through a mutual friend that they recommended that I teach there. So nice. There wasn't really much of a juggling. I think there were maybe one or two students that could juggle. The friend who recommended me was somebody that I actually taught to juggle a long time ago, a hometown friend from West Virginia, and he worked at an NGO down the street. So that's how I got involved. They gave me an invitation to come over, and so I fell in love with the circus and fell in love with the concept. The beautiful thing about the circus, actually, in Afghanistan is that most people believed in the beginning that Afghanistan shouldn't have a circus. It needs roads, it needs hospitals, it needs basic health care and basic provisions, housing and so on. And those are very easy things to measure, right? So you build a building and you have 20 units and so many floors, and you put that in your report that we built this building and it takes so many workers, so many days, and there's a sense of finality and completion, and you can look at the building and say, yeah, that's what we did. But the circus builds the heart, builds the spirit, and it also does education work. So it's a way of building the mind and building sensibilities which are not easy to put on paper, but yet are the essence of really development in a country like Afghanistan.
So it's a traveling circus? How does it work? How do you reach the kids that you work with, and what's the program?
So the circus started in 2002 by a man named David Mason, and he, after the 9/11 attacks here and after the U.S. Invasion or arrival in Afghanistan, he decided that children needed to laugh again. So he returned to start a circus knowing nothing. He was a professional dancer in various parts of Europe, and so he started this program to go to schools by bus and teach children through circus performance. So, for example, they started out with a hygiene performance. They would teach children how to brush their teeth. So they had a massive 10-foot-long toothbrush and a 5-foot-long toothpaste tube, and they would teach them the importance of hygiene with that, or they would teach children how to wash their hands using songs. And a huge hand that's clean and a huge hand that's dirty, and the big dirty hand comes out and grabs one of the actors on stage and shakes him around, and then he starts like coughing and getting sick, and he runs off the stage because he has to go to the bathroom. And then a clean hand comes out after they've taught the children through song and dance how to wash their hands, and they have this great emotional event that they remember for years to come, that is in their language, not the language of a brochure or the language of some adult trainers, but the language of kids, the language of laughter, comedy, play. So that's how it started. And it was a bus that was parked at the NGO called Asiana for the first year or so, and then they started getting more money and trying to create a center in Kabul where the kids could actually come and stay and eat, and not stay overnight, but just to stay as from an 8 to 5 or 7 to 5 throughout the day and take classes. And that evolved into this concept of what's now called social circus, something where circus is used as a medium to both attract kids, retain their attention for certain messages, and also to teach broader messages that have social themes, like HIV/AIDS awareness, or how to treat children with disabilities, or how to avoid landmines, or how to wash your hands or brush your teeth, or whatever the message may be that a particular NGO or donor wants to convey. So that was in 2003 that the Circus Center started in Kabul. Had 2 of the tallest trees in this one part of Kabul, and so it had bullet holes all around the walls, and they filled all those in, and they painted everything bright colors. So the main colors are bright red, bright green, bright yellow, and bright blue. Everything is those 4 colors. And then acrobatics started going, and they started doing bigger and bigger and bigger acrobatics. And there's now a circus performance by children. So that travels around Kabul and the area, but also Bamiyan, because we have a center there, and some of the other centers. And there's also an adult mobile circus, and they do educational content in the more remote areas. And between those two, the circus is performed for about 2.7 million live audiences, according to the Ministry of Education estimates. So now we've gotten to the point where it's NGOs, we don't have the capacity to do all the projects that people ask us to do, so that an NGO will say, well, we have this message we need to get out to 300,000 people in these 5 provinces, can you do it? And we say, well, we don't really have the time. We've got so many other things going on. So that's a good sign. It means we need more circus and more capacity. And that's the program, the series of programs. We have a journalism program as well, so we produce our own radio show by kids. We have our own recording studio with equipment and so on. We have a calligraphy class. We have actually over 50 different classes now that rotate throughout the year. We have about 200 kids at the Bamiyan Circus. They're child artists. We have about 300 at the Kabul Circus. We have maybe 150 or so in Mazar Sharif, in Herat, and I've lost track of the other numbers. But they're all over the map, so to speak, in Afghanistan. And it's very effective. And we also now have a National Juggling Federation.
Wow.
It's under the Afghan Olympic Committee, and we had the inauguration with the head of the Olympic Committee there just in August of last year.
I asked Zach to walk me through one day at the Afghan mobile mini circus.
Okay, so picture this. Around 7 o'clock in the morning, you wake up. The first feeling on your face is your mosquito net because it's drooped down from where you hung it and you have a little itch on your cheek. You wake up, push the mosquito net away, you go into the bathroom, you fill a bucket full of water. Hopefully it's warm water. You do a bucket shower, and already you hear the sound of children laughing out in the courtyard. You hear the patter of their feet. And if they know you're there, then they'll probably come up to your door and they'll start knocking on your door and asking you to perform for them a magic trick or teach them a juggling pattern. The noise of the circus is throughout the day. So if you're not up by 7, something must be. You must really need sleep. It's very hard to stay asleep. You're up and at it, and you have breakfast maybe with the teachers. It's just some basic naan and maybe some jam. And then you're off for the day. The classes go from usually around 8 o'clock, 8:30, throughout the day until about 2 o'clock. And then, because of school schedules, children will usually go to school for about 2 hours a day. So either they'll go in the morning and then go to class at the circus in the afternoon, or they'll stay at they'll mix it up based on what their school schedules are. School is I won't say it's a joke, but it's somewhat of a joke. The public schools there, so the circus is sort of a supplement and in some ways a replacement of the public school education system. More than anything, though, what you see over and over again are students learning skills that give them a sense of self-confidence, a poise that NGOs and typically don't get to create in children. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to measure that. Because it's visible. It's a very visible effect. The circus is there. The kids who come and participate in the circus have this incredible resilience and self-confidence. They're laughing more. They're smiling more. They're much more engaging in social interactions. They're much more confident in engaging foreigners and also as well as Afghans. And it's hard to measure that. It's a very visceral, strong effect. And I'm sure that 20 years from now, we'll see that these children are much more successful than other children. But if we don't measure that, there's sort of no numeric justification for the circus.
Regardless of measurements, what does this kind of circus do that's creating such an impact?
It's really, we call it educational circus or social circus because there's a social message, social theme. But we do creativity, we do critical thinking. We actually work with a lot of that soft stuff that people talk around, and you try to get at in trainings, and we do it experientially. So, for example, we might engage local mullahs in working with clay. So you've got these groups of very conservative extremist groups, maybe even sometimes pro-Taliban, working with their hands and getting all muddy and creating something. Probably not a person because that would be a false idol, but creating something together and bonding together across ethnic groups and using that spirit of play as a launching point for discussions and dialogue and everything else. That's an example of what one of the programs the adults do.
What is it about play? What is it about bringing in a circus that's having this effect?
I could answer as a social scientist, and I could say, well, play is the language of children and learning, right? And various studies have shown that play is associated with learning, much great increases in learning. If we learned very early on that encouragement combined with play is very powerful. If a child says, "Dad, Dad," we don't slap it and say that's Daddy, or if that's Father. No, we say, "Good job, that's great," and you play back and you echo and you do mimicry. So we know that psychologically speaking, play is a very effective language for communication and learning. But putting that aside for a moment and just speaking in anecdotes directly to you, I'll tell you 2 stories.
Great.
Stories are good. Great. Storytelling this is what it's about, really. So I'll tell you first the story of Abida, who is a young girl that learned to walk on stilts for the first time. She was, I think, an orphan, and she used to wear a headscarf very tight around her neck, like this, and very shy. And she learned to walk on stilts at the circus, and the stilts put her up about 2 feet taller than what she was at. And they're wooden blocks with bicycle tubing around her feet tied. And once she was up on those stilts, she changed from being this very quiet, shy girl to a very extroverted, boisterous, confident, shouting girl, telling her friends, look at me. And so she started walking around the circus, prancing around. She was taller than all the other boys and all the other girls and all the teachers. And after about 45 minutes or so, the teacher said, okay, abide wachtas, it's time, you need to come down. And she said, nee, as in no. Mm-hmm. And she kept walking around on these stilts. And she continued doing that for several hours. Oh. After several hours, her feet started to bleed because of the way she was tied in, and there were just blocks of wood and rubber from bike tire. But she continued walking around, even still. And eventually she decided to come down. She decided it was time. And they undid her feet. They cleaned up the cuts and whatnot. But the point is, when you're asking what is the point of a circus, what is the impact of a circus, what prompts a little Afghan girl to walk on 2 stilts when they cause her body to bleed and be in pain? What is so powerful emotionally, psychologically, that would cause her to override that sensation just for the feeling of the thrill? And my answer to that question is that I hope she's developing this kind of emotional reservoir of strength and confidence. And throughout her life, she's an Afghan girl, eventually an Afghan woman. She's going to encounter a lot of difficult situations in marriage and throughout life as a woman in Afghanistan. So, if she, as much as she can, if she can have an emotional reservoir of strength and confidence, she can go back and touch upon whenever she needs it. I think that's important. How do you measure that? I don't know, but it's important. I'll tell you a second story. So, in 2005, I went out to Bamyan, central Afghanistan, and did a performance with the circus. I don't perform with them anymore because it's for security reasons, for my own security and for theirs. But I did this performance in Bamyan, and I didn't have any props, so I took some UNHCR, I think, tent poles they had, and I locked them together, and I balanced maybe 20 or 30 feet of tent pole on my chin, which is actually quite difficult. But it was a fun sort of experiment and very visuals in front of where the Buddhas of Bamyan were. And I did a number of other tricks, and then we finished, and I left, and I went back to the U.S. And 2 years later, in 2007, I went back again and performed one more time with the circus in Bamyan. And I was in the main bazaar before the performance, and I went into a shop because I wanted a DVD, and I said, do you have any romantic comedies or anything like that? And sure enough, they had, like Ally McBeal and all the typical ones. You'd be amazed at how much Hollywood gets out, even to the remotest of areas in Afghanistan. Anyway, we were having some communication issues, and the guy at the shop said, well, let me bring in a real English speaker. And so an 18-year-old kid came in named Assad, and he spoke perfect English with a Texan accent. And I said, how do you speak perfect English? And he says, well, actually, I went to Texas, and not saying Texan English is perfect, but just that I'm speaking Texas English. And I said, well, how did you go to Texas? And he says, well, there was a language competition for English, and I scored first on this test. So they got me on a trip to Texas as an exchange student in high school. And I said, well, why did you learn English in the first place? What prompted you to learn English? And he said, well, actually, there was a circus that came to town a few years ago, and there was an American in the circus, and he was speaking English. And I thought, I want to speak to this man. And I said, where was this circus from? Was this a Turkish circus, or who were these? Who were these people? And And he described something very similar to my circus, or the circus I was with, and I said, well, do you remember the name of the American? And he kind of looked puzzled for a moment and looked back at me and he said, Zach. And I thought, oh, yeah. I said, that's me. So we became very good friends, and we traveled around the next several days in Bamiyan, and he showed me different sites and historic places. But that's an example where, I was out in a remote area. It was just a simple, single performance, and yet it had an effect that I couldn't anticipate. Now, most budgets and proposals in nonprofit work, of course, are based on anticipation, prediction. You don't go into a project unless you know what the outcome will be. But a lot of times you really don't. It's an estimation, and particularly when things are related to motivation. You really don't know what the impact's going to be. You can go in with a training program, and you can say, I trained this many participants. Did you motivate them to continue learning beyond that workshop? I mean, you could do a follow-up study and find out, but there's sort of an art in predicting what does and doesn't motivate people, and the circus has motivation wrapped around its finger, right? I mean, there's an old saying that all you need in society is bread and circuses. Right?
Where is that from?
It's an old Roman saying, bread and circuses, because they temper the masses. And it's ironic, right? Because bread is a biological need, mm-hmm. and circus is a psychological need.
So as long as we have bread and circuses.
Right. Or as E.E. Cummings once wrote, damn everything but the circus. Which is, ironically, of course, the only place where nothing is damned.
How many more circus quotes do you have?
I've got lots.
Keep it coming.
There's something here for everyone, P.T. Barnum. I can keep going, but I'll stop there. What's your next question?
I was curious about the boy Zach had described. He went through this process of wanting to learn English so that he could talk to you. Did you ever find out why? What he wanted to talk to you about?
Yeah, I don't think it was a particular thing. I think it was more of that's an interesting person with interesting experiences. It's very exotic. We ironically think of Afghanistan as the most exotic place on earth in some mm-hmm. ways. It's one of the most exotic. We still have that National Geographic image of the woman with the strong eyes, and it's so out there, so remote, so rugged. Well, they have also that psychology of appreciation for the exotic. So much so that, for example, last time I was there, a headline in an Afghan newspaper described a woman who had like 8, what do you call it, when you have 8 children at once, not sextuplets, but octuplets.
Octuplets, maybe?
It was a new Guinness record or something, or maybe not a Guinness record, but there's some record of incredible number of children at once, which sounds very painful to me. But anyway, it made the headlines there. I mean, it was above news about Karzai and Obama and anything else. It was above how many people had died in Ghazni. This was big news. There's a fascination with this sort of the miraculous, the exotic, the strange, and they eat that up. They love it. And so I think when they see an American or a foreigner, on some level they think, wow, this is someone from the outside world. I mean, we've seen the outside world in little bits and pieces. We've seen Coca-Cola, we've seen bits and pieces of American culture. We see Ally McBeal or Friends or whatever you might have in the bazaar. But now to see one and touch one, that's different. The relationship that the developing world has with the developed world is best described as parasocial. Right? It's one way, mm-hmm. non-reciprocal. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of relationship you might have with a news anchor that you have a crush on, or Britney Spears, or a rock star, or someone who you see in the movies, but you never actually get to talk to. And I think there's something really powerful about seeing someone that you have a parasocial relationship with, and they recognize you, and they see you as a person. I always wonder why it is that Obama and Romney and others, campaign so aggressively to meet people and shake so many hands. I always wonder if people were really rational and they were just driven by purely political ideas, they don't need to shake anyone's hand to vote for them. But there's something about actually shaking their hand that increases the probability that they're going to vote for that person. Mm-hmm. We talk about troops on the ground in Afghanistan. The troops we have on the ground in Afghanistan wear sunglasses to hide their eyes. They guard their bodies with armor, and they live behind compounds for the most part. It's even there, it's still a parasocial relationship because the Afghans see them, they see their base, they only interact with them through a translator or an interpreter. And I think if you're an American without, or if you're any foreigner actually, without security, dressed in plain clothes, I think it's a whole different level of relationship.
Well, so that actually leads me, that was going to be my next question or curiosity, is going into a place where we have such an obvious military presence as a non-militaristic individual going in a different way and coming in with the circus. How do you find that dichotomy, and have you run into experiences where with that being so different from the militaristic approach, obviously?
It's very different. First of all, just as a caveat, though, I try to distance myself a little bit from the circus. I don't perform with them now. I'm behind the scenes. The reason is it's important for them to be seen as an Afghan organization. Mm-hmm. And any interaction or presence or publicity of a foreigner involved with them in some ways might compromise the legitimacy that they have in other Afghan eyes. So
were you one of the only foreigners with them? Is it mostly?
We have foreigners that visit, but not. There's me and there's Seth Bloom from who's another performer. We're the two Americans who have been there probably the longest. He's been going since 2003, and I've been going since 2005. We've brought in other jugglers and visitors for usually that summer, maybe 1 or 2 months, something like that. And we also have 2 Danish directors, the founder David Mason and Barrett and Mulhausen, both Danish, and they're the ones who sort of run the day-to-day behind the scenes in collaboration with the Afghans. But it's really important that they're seen as an Afghan circus. Really important. Otherwise, otherwise it's hard for Afghans to feel proud of it because they don't see it as their own. And it really is an Afghan circus. I mean, they're Afghans flipping through the air, doing backflips. They're Afghans juggling on a unicycle. They're Afghans doing a theater, not foreigners. Foreigners actually can't even, the 2 directors, bless their souls, they can't do a backflip for the life of them. And I can juggle, but now the students that I had are better than I am. So I have to bring in experts to take them to the next level. But I'm not answering your question.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So the difference between troops and civilians. Well, this whole idea of a troop surge is quite interesting, I think, in general, because we think that if we have a surge in troops, that's going to improve security and stability. And in some ways it does, but it doesn't address questions of identity and perception. And even as Petraeus and others have acknowledged, this is a war of perceptions in many ways. And the truth is, if anybody comes into any American village or town with armor and with guns, no matter what they say, we're here to protect your families, we're here for security, your security, there's still a big barrier that's created between you. Now, obviously, people have to have security, otherwise, if you're attacked, you really are out. But it changes the dynamic. I mean, and we see this with the rise of insider violence. Mm-hmm. Some studies, in fact, many studies have suggested that, and through contact theory, Gordon Allport's contact theory, that when you bring 2 groups together and have more contact with each other, there's more dialogue, more exchange, and then they like each other more, right? They're more collaborative. But we know that that's not always true. Through conflict theory, through ethnic competition theory, through constrict theory, various reasons suggest that sometimes groups don't always get together. Sometimes things get worse. Terror management theory is another example. Sometimes things get worse, and I think when you have armed troops engaging ordinary Afghans, that's a scenario where it's pretty clear what's going to cause the tension. It's not very nice to talk to people when they have a gun, and that gun is ready in case you try to do something. So we have insider violence problems. The military has tried to respond to that. It's been on the rise, and it corresponds with the troop surge. And so the military has tried to, for example, improve the response rate to a potential attack by requiring U.S. soldiers to always have a gun loaded when they go into the presence of Afghans. Well, that doesn't really help, does it? Or there's always somebody assigned in case there is an insider attack among the American troops. There's always one person who is ready to open fire on the Afghan partners. That doesn't improve things either. I mean, it's going to be a short-term preventative fix if you are going to get attacked, but it doesn't address some of the deeper problems, like some of the assumptions that, and often these are really stupid fights. They're often attacks over a U.S. soldier saying something like, Islam is a terrible religion. I hate Islam. Mm-hmm. Well, of course it's going to offend somebody who doesn't have anything except their religion, right? I mean, they see everyone, the U.S. comes, they have more money, they have more power, brute power, they have, better machinery, they have the internet. Most websites are made in the West. They have a language that's more common around the world. They have all these things. So what do Afghans have to contribute? What do the Afghans have to bring to the table? Well, they have religion. They have Islam. And Islam has to be perfect. So if it's not perfect, what do they have to bring to the table? So it makes sense that when they feel like there's a Quran burning by accident, that's an attack on their sense of identity. That's like burning their grandmother's picture.
Yeah.
Or throwing out muffins made by their grandmother with love and care into the fire. Right? But these are some of the complexities, I think, that come out through that contact between troops and Afghans. And I don't think that they're I don't think they're irrevocable, or but I do think that the U.S. military has a tendency, by design, simply not to acknowledge them and to move on. Now that the U.S. military is leaving, and there's a question of the footprint that's left behind, I think there's going to be an increasing amount of attention on sustainable relationships, and some sort of more positive relationships that are not based on inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I'd just like to add that whenever in the past when I've put out advertisements for U.S. volunteers, I get so many applications. So many people in the U.S. want to come and volunteer in Afghanistan. I mean, maybe they just came out of bad breakups and they want to get away. But the point is, there are a lot of people who want to come and volunteer in Afghanistan. And yet the military and the security contractors and others feel somehow that they have to pay danger pay, inconvenience pay, and all these additional incentives to get security contractors to come over. And I think there's a great irony there, And you've got all these people who want to come and volunteer for free, put their life at risk, and yet we insist upon paying a bunch of no-neck security guys, with all due respect to them. They are taking risks, but we insist that we have to get these people here and not these other people who want to volunteer out of the goodness of their hearts, or an adventure, or whatever is driving them.
In his time in Afghanistan, Zach has come up with his own 3-step strategy for reducing insider violence, which he was also happy to share.
Here's a simple 3-step strategy for reducing the number of insider violence incidents. And this will never, ever happen, by the way. 1, every U.S. soldier is required to, before going to Afghanistan, they must be able to recite in entirety an Afghan poem in Dari or Pashto. 2, they must be able to sing an Ahmed Zahir song. Ahmed Zahir is considered the Elvis Presley of Afghanistan. And 3, they must be able to say one Afghan joke. If they can complete these 3 things, I think the number of insider violence will drop by at least 50% overnight.
So do you ever find this perception when you're there that people meet you and they're like, oh, you're an American, you must have these backwards ideas about our culture and have no idea what you're doing here?
Do they ever think I have backwards ideas? I'm sure that they do. I'm sure they do. But generally when we talk, they're always very interested in learning more about America. They may come to me because they want a job or they think I have money. But if you can kind of strip away some of those other roles that create inequalities and just try to, somehow greet them as a person, have a meal with a person, or take a walk with them, or do something that's just basic human, those tend to go away. Or learning to juggle. If you practice juggling with somebody, that's a great way to get to know them, humanize them.
Great.
But yeah, I mean, we have lots of misconceptions about Afghanistan, and I don't think they read enough news in some ways to know how much of a misconception we have. And we're just coming around, I think, understanding how much of a misconception we have. I even have misconceptions after 8 years there. I still learn new things every time I go. And I realize, oh yeah, I didn't quite get that right, or I didn't get that right. I've made so many mistakes. I've offended elders and judges. But if you do it with a certain sincerity and humility, in general, they let you pass. I've eaten with my left hand, which is the hand I use to clear things,
that one I
so
know.
to speak. I've made all kinds of mistakes. I used to unicycle around Kabul at first.
What's the mistake there?
It tells everybody, look, here's an American, and here's where he lives and works. I used to teach girls how to unicycle, and I was told not to do that anymore because girls are not even allowed to ride on bicycles in Afghanistan because there's something between their legs.
Mm-hmm.
One time I was doing a performance and I asked an elder to make an animal noise. Everyone was silent in the crowd, maybe like 2,000 people watching, complete silence, and I have a microphone and I'm asking this elder to make an animal noise, and that's apparently a real offensive, at least I was told that was a potentially offensive thing to do, because an elder is not supposed to act like an animal.
What did you do?
Well, I waited. It was a very long, embarrassing silence, and I kept shifting around to different people. And finally, there was one elder that had the balls to just roar like a lion. And because he was breaking the code, because everybody knew that I was at this point an idiot, everyone busted out laughing, right? Because I was clearly breaking a social convention, but they had, as the audience, the grace, and this particular elder had the confidence and courage to just call me out on it, and kind of everyone could just laugh at themselves and laugh at the situation. So that was an effective use. A lot of times, too, I'll say the greatest way, I think, to break down some of these barriers and roles that we construct, a soldier, or non-soldier, or foreigner, or Afghan, is simply to use humor in a very direct way. And the easiest, of course, access we have to humor cross-culturally is slapstick. Charlie Chaplin, America's Funniest Home Videos style humor. There's nothing to get. There's no real joke. There's no real complex language. But you can also do laugh at me humor. You can make fun of yourself. You might say, well, that's too complicated. Maybe that doesn't transfer. No, that transfers. Imagine how Afghans see us, and then joke about that. You can joke about eating with your left hand. Or you can call yourself a stupid or an idiot. Now, a U.S. ambassador is never going to draw attention to his own stupidity.
Right.
It's just not what we do. A U.S. soldier is, on average, probably, not going to draw attention to how stupid he looks with all these things hanging off every which way, little pockets for different meals. He's probably not going to draw attention to the fact that he gets really constipated because he eats MREs all day. And those are terrible for that. But, I'll give you an example. One time I was on the street, and I forget what happened. I think it was something involving, it wasn't the Danish cartoons, but it was something else related. It was an attack on Muhammad or Islam or something, and there were all these riots in the city, and I was walking around, and I was going to get a loaf of bread. This guy comes up to me, and he says, he's really ticked off, really angry, and he says, Isai esti, like, are you a Christian? Mm-hmm. And and he said, then I didn't answer, and he said, where are you from? And of course, he wanted to get, you're an American, you're a Christian, this is your fault, you're the one, again, there's no exchange in this parasocial relationship, and here's his opportunity to take out the feelings he has. So he asked me, what country are you from? Where are you from? And I said, Ma iz Kishwari Shitoni Buzurgastam, which is the Ayatollah Khomeini's term for America, the great state.
The great state.
So I said, I'm from the great state. So I indicate to him, look, I know I'm from America. I have a double vision on myself here. And he was still ticked off, but everyone around started laughing because they didn't expect that to come out of my mouth. Right? They expect something else, a defensive posture. And instead, I was just like, okay, I'm going to laugh at myself. I'm going to joke about myself because I understand how you see me now, and I get it. So they were laughing, and so he didn't do anything. Everyone's laughing around. And when you have people laughing around you, at you, you have them on your side. Mm-hmm. That's not, of course, foreign policy. Foreign policy is, no, we sit on separate sides of the table. We respect each other's side. We don't joke about our side. We don't mock ourselves. But imagine if we did. From time to time, I think it can be very, very effective. Not all the time, and we certainly want to show respect through seriousness. But we have more than enough diplomats that are versed at that. We need more diplomats who are versed at the other side of, poking fun at things which deserve to be poked fun at.
In closing, I asked Zach, in his trips to Afghanistan and traveling with the Afghan Mobile Mini Circus since 2005, what's the one thing that he'd like to leave with us? What's the quintessential message he's learned?
There's an Afghan expression, a proverb that goes, "Nano pyaz peshani waz," which means literally bread and onions, a forehead open. It's something that Afghans say when they're presented with an opportunity to make money or have a certain success, but it brings with it certain moral consequences. And they if you turn away those moral you turn away the success, you also kind of relax. You're not worried anymore about the moral implications. So, for example, if I said to someone, "Hey, I need you to do this thing for me, that's somehow against your code of ethics, but I'll give you a lot of money for it," and they turn me down, they might say, "Nano pyaz peshani was," meaning if I eat humble pie, I'll be morally relaxed. I'll be at ease in my conscience. So I love this saying, one, because it's a wisdom that is across cultures, and two, I think much as I would have liked to have made money in Afghanistan over the years, especially now as a graduate student living in a basement still, there's something really nice about living on the cheap and being forced to engage with Afghans in the bazaars or in the markets. And so I would rather not get as much dysentery. I'd rather not have parasites every time I come back. I'd rather not go into detail about these kinds of things. But eating in some ways humble pie, I think, and going consistently, maintaining relationships with my students, and kind of living on the cheap as a volunteer has been, I think, one of the greatest experiences of my life. And I think when else do people have this kind of experience? Peace Corps, maybe, or if you're, Mormon and you're on a mission, maybe. But I'm just a secular kind of Quaker, and I want the experience still. So I think that is something that my experiences in Afghanistan, Nano pyaz peshani was.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the interview.
Thank you to Zach Warren and the Afghan Mobile Mini Circus for their work and for allowing us to share it. If you would like to find out more about Zach Warren or the circus, please visit our website at scar.gmu.edu/cpp, where you can find links to this information. Thank you for listening.